The message came on a cold morning when the twin suns had barely risen over the crystal spires of Kala Prime. And Lady Valith Soren felt her world shatter with every word her mother spoke. "You will marry the human," the High Matriarch said, her voice carrying no room for argument. "This is not a request, daughter. This is the will of the council." Valith stood frozen in the throne room, her 4 hearts beating in a rhythm of pure disbelief. And she wanted to scream, but she was Kalari, and Kalari did not scream. "A human," she finally whispered, the word tasting like poison on her tongue. "You would give me to one of those primitive creatures?" The Kalari were ancient, proud, and beautiful, their silver skin and violet eyes marking them as one of the elder races of the galaxy. And they had mastered star travel when humans were still living in caves and hunting with sharpened stones, too. Be wed to an outsider was already a great shame, but to be wed to a human was an insult that would follow her bloodline for generations. Her mother rose from the crystalline throne, her long robes trailing behind her like liquid shadow. And she approached Valith with eyes that held both command and something that might have been sorrow. "The Terran Alliance has offered us protection against the Vreth Syndicate," she explained. "Their fleets will guard our borders. Their soldiers will fight beside ours. And in return, they ask for one thing. Me," Valith said bitterly. "A union between our houses," her mother corrected. "You are my 3rd daughter, Valith, and you have always known that your purpose would be to serve the Empire through marriage." Valith wanted to argue, wanted to fight, wanted to do anything but accept this fate. But she looked at her mother and saw the weight of an entire civilization pressing down on those ancient shoulders. Vreth Syndicate had been raiding Kalori borders for decades, taking their people as slaves, burning their colonies. And the Kalori fleet was strong, but not strong enough to fight alone. "When does he arrive?" Valith asked, her voice empty of emotion. 3 days. The next 3 days passed like a dream filled with dread. And Valith spent them training with her blade in the palace gardens, her crystal sword singing through the air as she imagined cutting down every human in the galaxy. Her younger sister Malith came to watch her on the 2nd day, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "I heard the human they are sending is nobody special," Melith said with obvious delight. "Not a warrior, not a prince, not even a proper diplomat. Just some quiet man they found somewhere. Leave me alone." "Melith, perhaps he will be ugly too," Melith continued, ignoring the warning in Valith's voice. "Humans are so strange with their pale, soft skin and their tiny eyes. I cannot imagine having to share a bed with one." Valith's blade stopped mid-swing, and she turned to look at her sister with cold fury. "One more word, and I will show you exactly how sharp this blade is." Melith laughed and walked away. But her words stayed with Valith like a wound that would not heal on the 3rd day. The human ship arrived at was a small vessel, simple and gray and utterly unremarkable compared to the elegant Kellery cruisers that filled the sky. And Valith watched it land from her window with a heavy heart. The entire court had gathered in the great hall to witness the arrival of her betrothed. Hundreds of Kalari nobles dressed in their finest silks and crystals, all of them wearing expressions of barely hidden contempt. Valith stood beside her mother on the raised platform, dressed in the traditional white gown of a Kalori bride, and she kept her face as still as stone, even though her insides were screaming. The doors opened and the human walked in. He was not what she expected. Valith had imagined a loud creature, perhaps one of those boastful human soldiers she had seen in war recordings, but this man was different. This man was quiet. He was of average height, neither tall nor short, with dark hair cut close to his head and pale eyes that seemed to take in everything without revealing anything in return. He wore simple dark clothing with no decorations, no medals, no signs of rank or status, and he carried no visible weapons despite walking into a hall full of the greatest warriors in Kalori history. The whispers started immediately. Is this a joke? Someone muttered, "They sent us a servant." Another voice hissed, "Look at him. He is nothing. He is no one." The human walked through the hall without any sign that he heard the insults, his footsteps steady and unhurried on the crystal floor. And when he reached the platform, he bowed low to the High Matriarch. "I am Silas Varn," he said, and his voice was soft and calm like water flowing over smooth stones. "I thank you for welcoming me into your house." The High Matriarch studied him with sharp eyes, and Valeth could not tell what her mother was thinking. "You are welcome here, Silas Varn of Terra," her mother replied with perfect diplomatic courtesy. "May this union bring peace and prosperity to both our peoples." Silas straightened and turned to look at Valeth for the first time, and she felt something strange when their eyes met. Not attraction, not hatred, but something she could not name. "My lady," he said simply, and bowed to her as well. Valeth said nothing because she did not trust herself to speak. Without letting her anger show, the ceremony took place that very evening, as was Kalori tradition, and Valeth moved through it like a ghost, speaking the ancient words without feeling them, minding herself to this strange, quiet human, while the court watched with pity and scorn. When it was done, and they were officially bonded under Kalori law, Valeth led her new husband to their chambers. Without a word, the rooms were beautiful, filled with crystal furniture and soft light, and a balcony that looked out over the endless city below. But Valeth cared nothing for beauty tonight. She turned to face Silas and spoke plainly. "I want you to understand something. Human, this marriage is politics and nothing more. I did not choose you, and I do not want you. We will share these chambers because we must, but we will not share a bed. We will not share our lives. We will exist beside each other until this arrangement is no longer needed. Do you understand?" She expected anger, expected argument, expected some kind of emotional response. Silas only nodded once. "I understand," he said quietly. "I will not ask anything of you that you do not wish to give." Then he walked to the far corner of the room where a large window looked out at the stars, sat down on the floor with his legs crossed, closed his eyes, and became perfectly still. Valeth watched him for a long moment, confused and frustrated, and somehow more unsettled by his acceptance than she would have been by his anger. She went to bed alone and did not sleep well. And when the morning suns rose, she found Silas still sitting by the window in exactly the same position, his breathing slow and even, his face peaceful. "Did you sit there all night?" she demanded. "Yes," he answered without opening his eyes. "Why?" "Because it is what I needed to do." Valeth shook her head and left to begin her day, thinking to herself that the humans had not sent her a husband at all. They had sent her a puzzle, a strange broken creature who made no sense. She did not know then how wrong she was, did not know that the quiet man by the window was the most dangerous being she had ever met, did not know that the silence he wore like a cloak was not emptiness but control. She would learn. They would all learn. Weeks passed, and Valeth found herself watching her strange husband more than she wanted to admit. Silas had fallen into a routine that never changed, and she learned it without meaning to, learned it simply because he was always there, quiet and constant like a shadow she could not escape. He rose before the twin suns every morning, moving so silently that she never heard him leave the bed corner where he slept on a simple mat he had requested from the servants. By the time she woke, he would already be on the balcony, tending to a small garden he had planted in boxes of soil brought from somewhere. She did not know at first. Valeth thought this hobby was foolish, a waste of time for a man who should have been learning Kalori customs or trying to earn respect among the court, but she noticed how carefully he worked with the tiny green plants, how his hands moved with gentle precision as he trimmed leaves and measured water, how he spoke to the growing things in a voice too soft for her to hear. "Why do you care so much about those weeds?" she asked him one morning. Her tone sharp with frustration. She did not fully understand. Silas looked up at her with those pale, steady eyes. They are not weeds. They are life. And life should be cared for. He returned to his work without another word, and Valeth walked away feeling like she had somehow lost an argument. She had not even been trying to have the court continue to mock him, sometimes openly and sometimes behind his back. And Silas never once responded with anger or defense. Her brother Kareth made a habit of insulting humans whenever Silas was present, speaking loudly about their weakness and their primitive ways and their place at the bottom of galactic civilization. Silas would simply nod politely and continue whatever he'd been doing before, as if the words were wind passing through an empty room. Does nothing bother you? Valeth demanded one evening after a particularly cruel session at dinner. My brother called your entire species vermin, and you just sat there smiling. Your brother is young and speaks from ignorance, Silas replied calmly. Ignorance is not worth anger. It is worth patience. You should defend yourself. You should defend your people. Why? The question stopped her cold because she did not have an answer. Because, she finally said, because that is what warriors do. I am not here as a warrior, Silas said quietly. I am here as your husband. And a husband does not bring conflict into his wife's home. Valeth stared at him and felt something shift inside her chest. Something she quickly pushed away because she refused to feel sympathy for this strange human who had been forced upon her. But she began to notice other things about him. Small things that did not fit with the image of a weak and broken man at a formal reception. She watched him catch 3 falling glasses in a single motion when a nervous servant stumbled nearby, his hand moving so fast that she barely saw it happen. When she blinked, the glasses were safely on the table, and Silas was helping the servant to her feet, asking if she was injured, and no one else seemed to have noticed what he had done. Another time, she saw him reading in the library ancient Kelori war poetry that even most Kelori found difficult to understand, and he was not just reading but studying, making notes in a small book he carried everywhere. You can read our language? She asked, genuinely surprised. I learned before I came here, he said without looking up. It seemed respectful to understand your culture before entering it. Most humans do not bother. I'm not most humans. There was no pride in his voice when he said it. No arrogance. Just a simple statement of fact that somehow carried more weight than any boast could have. Valeth sat down across from him. Driven by a curiosity she could not explain. What are you reading? The Lament of Morvan. It is about the siege 800 years ago, when your ancestors held the Crystal Fortress against the Wrath for 300 days. I know what it is about. It is required learning for every Kelori child. Then perhaps you can explain something to me, Silas said. And he looked at her with genuine interest. In the 3rd stanza, the poet speaks of the blade that drinks the dawn. I have read 3 different translations, and none of them agree on what this means. Valeth found herself explaining the old metaphor. How Kelori crystal blades were forged at sunrise and were said to absorb the light of the dawn into their structure. And Silas listened with complete attention, as if every word she spoke was precious. They talked for 2 hours about poetry and history and war. And when Valeth finally stood to leave, she realized it was the longest conversation she had ever had with him that night. She could not sleep, her mind turning over everything she had learned about this quiet man who seemed to have no past and no future, only an endless patient present. She went to the information networks when everyone else was asleep and searched for records of Silas. Varn she found nothing. No birth records, no family history, no military service, no education files. Nothing at all before the day he arrived on Kala Prime. It was as if the man had appeared from thin air, as if he had been created fully formed just to become her husband. This was not possible. Records did not simply vanish. Everyone left traces in the great databases that connected the galaxy. And yet Silas had none. What are you hiding?" she whispered to the empty screen. The next morning, she confronted him directly, standing in front of his garden with her arms crossed and her eyes hard. "You were a soldier," she said. And it was not a question. Silas paused with his hands still buried in the dark soil. And for just a moment, she saw something flicker across his face. Something that might have been pain or might have been memory. "I was many things," he finally answered. "What things?" "Things that do not matter anymore. They matter to me. You are my husband, whether I wanted you or not. And I deserve to know who I am bound to." Silas wiped his hands slowly and stood to face her. And there was something different in his eyes now. Something deep and old and tired. "I was a soldier once, yes, but that man died a long time ago. And the man who stands before you now is just a gardener who wants to grow something instead of destroying. That is not an answer. It is the only answer I can give you." He returned to his plants, and Valith stood there, feeling more confused than ever. The silence around her husband was no longer awkward or strange. It had become something else entirely, something that made her skin prickle with a warning she could not name. There was a secret hiding behind those pale eyes, a truth buried so deep that even she could not dig it out, and she found herself wondering if she truly wanted to know what it was. The answer came sooner than she expected. It came in blood and fire and the screaming of her people, and it came in the form of a blade she never knew existed. A blade that would change everything she thought she understood about humans, about war, about the quiet man she had married without love. But that night, she simply watched him work in his garden as the sun set over the crystal spires. And she thought about how strange it was that the most mysterious being she had ever met was also the most peaceful. She did not know that peace was a choice he made every single day. She did not know how hard it was to make that choice. She would learn soon enough. The Festival of Twin Moons was the most sacred celebration in Kalori culture. A night when both moons rose full and silver in the sky, and the entire empire stopped to honor their ancestors. The palace was filled with thousands of guests, nobles and warriors and diplomats from across the sector, and the great hall blazed with light from 10,000 crystal lanterns. Valith stood near her mother's throne, dressed in ceremonial armor that had belonged to her grandmother, a crystal blade hanging at her hip as tradition demanded. She looked across the crowded hall and found Silas standing alone near one of the tall windows, watching the celebration with his usual quiet expression. He had not worn armor, had not carried a blade, had simply put on the same dark, simple clothing he always wore. And the sight of him made something twist in her chest. Part of her was annoyed that he had not tried harder to fit in. But another part of her, a part she did not want to examine too closely, was almost glad that he remained himself, even surrounded by a culture that despised him. Music changed to an ancient battle hymn, and the crowd parted for the ceremonial dance of swords. Young warriors performing the moves that their ancestors had used to drive back the Vreth centuries ago. Valith was watching them when the first explosion hit. Eastern wall of the great hall disappeared in a storm of fire and crystal shrapnel, and the screaming started before the dust had even settled. Vrith raiders poured through the breach, their dark armor absorbing the light, their weapons spitting plasma bolts into the panicked crowd. Valith drew her blade without thinking, her body moving into a fighting stance before her mind had fully understood what was happening. This was impossible. The palace shields were impenetrable. The defense grid was the most advanced in the sector. And yet the Vreth were here, inside the heart of Kalori power, killing her people. Protect the matriarch. Someone screamed, and Valith saw her mother's guards forming a wall around the throne. She fought her way toward them, her crystal blade singing as it cut through the first Vreth who tried to block her path. The raider fell in 2 pieces, and Valith did not slow down, her training taking over, her body becoming a weapon. But there were too many of them, far too many. And as she cut down one enemy, two more appeared to take his place. Then she saw the rivers. They came through the breach like nightmares given flesh. 7 feet tall and covered in bone-white armor that had been grafted directly to their skin. Reavers were the Vreth Syndicate's most terrible weapons. Gene-spliced killers bred for one purpose only, and that purpose was slaughter. The Kalori guards fell before them like grass before a scythe, their crystal blades shattering against the Reavers' enhanced body as Velith watched in horror as her mother was struck by a plasma bolt and collapsed. Watched as the guards who had protected her since childhood were torn apart. Watched as everything she had known and loved was destroyed in minutes. She ran not from cowardice but from necessity, because she could see that the battle was lost and someone needed to survive. Someone needed to carry word of what had happened here. She made it to the Hall of Ancestors before they caught up with her. 3 Reavers cornered her in the ancient chamber where the bones of Kalori heroes lay in crystal tombs, their red eyes glowing with hunger, their clawed hands dripping with violet blood. Velith raised her blade and prepared to die with honor. "Little princess," one of the Reavers growled, its voice a broken thing that hurt to hear. "The Syndicate sends its regards." They lunged at her all at once, and Velith fought with everything she had, her blade flashing in desperate arcs that cut shallow wounds in their armored flesh. But they were too strong, too fast, too many. And a massive clawed hand caught her arm and twisted until she dropped her sword. She was going to die here in the Hall of her ancestors. And she thought of her mother, thought of her people, thought strangely of the quiet human she had married and never given a chance. Then smoke filled the doorway, and a shadow stepped through. Silas walked into the hall like he was walking into his garden on a peaceful morning. Unhurried and calm and completely without fear. In his hands he held something long and dark, a case she had seen in their chambers but never thought to question. "Let her go," he said. And his voice was still soft, but there was something underneath it now. Something cold and terrible. The Reavers laughed. The sound like grinding metal. "A human," one of them sneered. "What will you do, little human? Bleed on us." Silas opened the case. The blade he drew was unlike anything Velith had ever seen. Not crystal, not plasma-forged steel, but something older and darker. Metal so black it seemed to drink the light around it. There was a shimmer along its edge, a hungry gleam that made her instincts scream warnings in every language she knew. "I will ask once more," Silas said quietly. "Let her go." The Reavers charged. What happened next lasted only seconds, but Velith would remember it for the rest of her life, would see it in her dreams, would try to describe it to others and find that words were not enough. Silas moved. He did not fight like a Kalori warrior with their formal stances and ritual strikes, did not fight like the Vreth with their brutal, overwhelming force. He moved like water, like shadow, like death itself, wearing human skin. The first Reaver swung at him with enough force to shatter stone, and Silas simply was not there, sliding past the blow like smoke, his dark blade opening the creature's throat before it could even register what had happened. Second Reaver lunged, and Silas spun beneath its arms, his sword cutting through the bone-white armor like it was paper. And the Reaver fell in pieces that did not match. The third one tried to run. Silas crossed the distance between them in a single step that covered 10 feet. And the black blade punched through the Reaver's chest and out its back before the creature could take another breath. 11 seconds. 3 Reavers, the most terrible weapons the Vreth Syndicate had ever created. Dead in 11 seconds. Silas flicked the blood from his blade with a motion so practiced it had to have been performed thousands of times before. And he sheathed the dark sword in its case with the same unhurried calm. He did everything. Then he turned to Velith and offered her his hand. "Are you hurt?" he asked quietly. She stared at him, her mind unable to process what she had just witnessed. her entire understanding of reality shifting beneath her feet. "What?" she whispered. "What are you?" Something flickered in his pale eyes, something that might have been sadness or might have been regret. "I am your husband," he said simply, "and I made a promise to protect you. Can you stand?" Valeth took his hand and let him pull her to her feet, and she noticed that his breathing had not changed. His pulse was not racing. His hands were completely steady. He had just killed 3 reavers with the casual ease of a master craftsman performing familiar work, and it had affected him no more than trimming his garden plants. "We need to move," Silas said. "The attack is failing, and the survivors will regroup with your mother's forces. But there may be more enemies between here and safety. My mother. Is she alive when I left her? Wounded, but alive. My priority was finding you." Valeth felt tears she did not expect burning in her eyes. "You came for me." "Of course I came for you." He said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world, like there had never been any other possibility. They moved through the burning palace together, and twice more Vreth raiders appeared to block their path, and twice more. Valeth watched her husband become something other than the quiet gardener she had known. He killed 6 more enemies before they reached the safe rooms where the surviving Kaelori forces had gathered. And each death was as quick and clean and precise as the first 3 when they finally walked through the reinforced doors and found her mother being treated by healers. Silas put away his blade and returned to being silent and still and ordinary. But Valeth knew now she had seen behind the mask, had glimpsed the truth that hid beneath the gardener's gentle hands. And she knew that nothing would ever be the same. Her husband was not broken. Her husband was the most dangerous man she had ever met, and he had chosen to protect her. The attack was over, but the questions had only begun 3 days after the Festival of Twin Moons turned to blood and fire. The palace was still being repaired, and the court was still in Chaos 47. Kaelori had died, including 12 of the High Matriarch's personal guard, and the crystal spires that had stood untouched for 1,000 years now bore scars that would take decades to heal. But all anyone could talk about was the human. Valeth heard the whispers everywhere she went, in the halls and the gardens, and the council chambers where her mother's advisors gathered to plan their response. "He killed 3 reavers alone. I heard it was 6. My cousin saw the bodies, cut so cleanly they looked like they had been carved by a master surgeon. What kind of human can do such things? What kind of blade can cut through reaver armor like it was silk?" Valeth had no answers for them because she had no answers for herself. Silas had returned to his routine as if nothing had changed, waking before dawn to tend his garden, sitting silently at meals, nodding politely when others spoke to him. But everything had changed. The way people looked at him had changed, and the contempt that had filled their eyes before was now mixed with something else. Fair Valeth found him on the balcony as the sun set, his hands buried in soil as always, and she stood watching him for a long moment before she spoke. "The council is meeting tomorrow. They want to honor you for what you did. My mother wishes to grant you the title of Shield Bearer. It is the highest military rank a non-Kaelori can receive." Silas did not look up from his plants. "That is kind of her. It is not kindness. It is recognition of what you did. You saved my life. You saved many lives. You deserve to be honored." "I do not want honor." Valeth felt her frustration rising, the same frustration that had plagued her since she first met this impossible man. "Then what do you want?" "Silas, what is it you actually want?" He finally looked at her, and she saw that exhaustion in his eyes again, that deep, tired sadness that seemed to have no bottom. "I want to grow things instead of destroying them. I want to wake up in the morning and know that the day ahead will hold nothing but peace. I want to forget the feeling of blood on my hands." "But you cannot forget." "No, I cannot. The blood is always there. It will always be there. All I can do is try to wash it away with new life." He gestured to his garden, to the small green plants that had somehow flourished under his caravalith, sat down beside him on the balcony floor, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. And she asked the question that had been burning in her mind since the moment she saw him draw that dark blade. "What are you?" "Silas, what were you before you came here?" For a long time he said nothing, and she thought he would refuse to answer, as he had refused so many times before. But then he began to speak, slowly, haltingly, like each word cost him something precious. "Have you ever heard of the Whisper program?" Vaylith shook her head. "You would not have. It was classified at the highest levels. The kind of secret that governments kill to protect. Even now speaking of it could end my life." He paused and looked out at the stars that were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "The galaxy is dangerous. You know this better than most. And when humanity first stepped out into the stars, we learned very quickly that we were small and weak and surrounded by powers that could destroy us without effort. Humanity is part of one of the largest military alliances in the sector now." Vaylith said, "We are now, but we were not always. And in those early years, the Terran government made a decision, a terrible decision. They decided that if humanity could not match the strength of the galaxy through numbers or technology, we would match it through other means." "What means?" "The Whispers were children taken from their families at age 5, chosen for specific genetic markers that indicated potential. We were raised in facilities, hidden in the darkest corners of Terran space, trained every day from the moment we could walk, enhanced with chemicals and surgeries that pushed our bodies beyond normal human limits." Vaylith felt cold spreading through her chest. "You were 5 years old?" "I do not remember being 5. I do not remember having a family. My first clear memory is learning how to kill a man with my bare hands when I was 7 years old." His voice was flat, empty, like he was describing something that had happened to someone else. "We were weapons. The most effective weapons humanity had ever created. They sent us into impossible situations, and we completed impossible missions. We ended wars before they could begin. We killed targets that entire fleets could not touch. We did things that history will never record, because if history knew, humanity would be condemned by every civilized species in the galaxy." "How many of you were there?" "At the peak of the program, 231. By the time it was shut down, only 17 of us were still alive." Vaylith tried to imagine it, tried to picture a child being turned into a weapon, tried to understand what kind of desperation could drive a species to sacrifice their own young in such a way. Why did they stop? Because we were too effective. The Whispers had become so good at what we did that the people who created us became afraid. Afraid of what we might do if we ever turned against them. Afraid of what we had become. Silas finally looked at her, and she saw it now. Saw the layers of pain and memory and horror hiding behind his calm exterior. They gave us a choice. Death or erasure. Our records would be destroyed. Our identities would disappear. We would become ghosts who never existed. And in return, we would be given new lives, new names, new purposes. You chose erasure. I chose to stop killing. I had so much blood on my hands that I thought I would drown in it. And when they offered me a chance to become someone else, someone who might be able to do something other than destroy, I took it without hesitation. And the blade? Silas reached out and touched the dark case that was never far from his side now. This blade is called Night Song. It was forged in the early days of the Whisper program, using techniques that have been deliberately forgotten. It is bonded to me through a process I do not fully understand, and it is the only thing I kept from my old life. Why keep it if you wanted to leave that life behind? Because I made a vow when I accepted this marriage. I vowed that I would protect whoever I was given to, not as a whisper, not as a weapon, but as a husband. And to keep that vow, I needed to be able to defend you if the time ever came. Valeth felt tears burning in her eyes again. Felt something cracking open in her chest that she had kept tightly, sealed since the day she learned she would be married. To a human, you kept a blade you hate just to protect someone who treated you with nothing but contempt. You were never contemptuous. You were angry and hurt and afraid. Those are different things. And I understood them because I have felt all of them myself. She reached out and took his hand. The hand that had killed hundreds. The hand that tended gardens with such gentle care. And she held it tightly. I am sorry. I am so sorry for how I treated you. You have nothing to apologize for. I have everything to apologize for. I looked at you and saw a weak man, a broken thing the humans had sent to insult us. I never tried to see who you really were. Who I really am is a complicated question. Then help me understand. Silas turned his hand over and held hers in return. And something passed between them in that moment. Something that was not love yet, but might become love given time. The man I was died a long time ago. The man I am now is someone I am still trying to understand. All I know for certain is that I am your husband, and that is enough for me. I hope someday it will be enough for you too. Valeth looked at this strange, quiet human who had been tortured into a weapon and had chosen peace. Who had every reason to hate the galaxy and instead grew flowers. Who had protected her without asking for anything in return. It is more than enough, she said softly. They sat together on the balcony until the stars filled the sky. Not speaking, just existing in the same space. And for the first time since their wedding, Valeth did not feel like she had been given a burden. She felt like she had been given a gift, a broken gift. Yes, a gift with scars and shadows and depths she might never fully understand, but a gift nonetheless. The Vreth War fleet arrived 3 weeks after the attack on the Palace of Ilith. Stood on the observation deck of the Kalori Command Center and watched 87 warships drop out of hyperspace in perfect formation. Their dark hulls blocking out the stars like a spreading wound in the sky. They demand the human, Admiral Korath said grimly. They say he murdered their warriors during what they claim was a diplomatic mission. They want him surrendered for execution. A diplomatic mission, Valeth's mother repeated from her hover chair. Still too weak to stand, but too stubborn to miss a council of war. They killed 47 of my people, and they call it diplomacy. The Syndicate has never been known for honesty. High Matriarch, nor for courage. They attacked during a festival when our defenses were lowered. And now they come with a fleet, because they are afraid to face us fairly. The council chamber filled with murmured agreement. And Valeth looked at Silas, standing silently in the corner as he always did. Watching and listening and revealing nothing. In the weeks since the attack, everything had changed between them. They talked now. Really talked. Sharing meals and walks through the gardens and long evenings discussing everything from Kalori poetry to human philosophies. Had learned about his favorite foods. Learned that he loved music but could not carry a tune. Learned that he had a dry humor that emerged only in private moments when his guard was down. She had learned that behind the weapon there was a man. A good man who had survived horrors she could not imagine and somehow kept his soul intact. And now the Vreth Syndicate wanted to take him from her. We will not surrender him, Valeth said loudly. And every head in the chamber turned toward her. Silas Varn is my husband and a hero of the Kalori Empire. The Syndicate can make their demands to the void for all I care. My daughter speaks the truth, her mother agreed. But we must be practical. The Vreth fleet outnumbers ours 3 to 1. If they choose to attack, we will fight bravely, but the outcome is uncertain. Then we send for reinforcements from the Terran Alliance, Admiral Korath suggested. The humans will surely come to defend one of their own. The nearest Terran fleet is 6 days away. The Vreth will not wait that long. Silas stepped forward, and the chamber fell silent. I have a suggestion, He said quietly, "Speak." "Shield bearer, give me a shuttle." The council stared at him in confusion. "You wish to surrender yourself?" Admiral Karth asked. "No. I wish to resolve this situation in a way that does not require Kelari blood to be spilled. One shuttle against 87 warships. What do you intend to do?" Silas looked at the tactical display showing the Vreth formation, and Valeth saw something change in his eyes. Saw the peaceful gardener disappear and something else emerge. Something cold and calculating and infinitely patient. "I intend to remind them why the Terran Alliance is left alone." The council erupted in arguments, some demanding that Silas explain himself, others insisting that he be kept safely on the planet, still others suggesting that perhaps surrendering him was not such a terrible option. Velith ignored them all and walked straight to her. "Husband, you cannot do this alone. I have done worse things alone. That is not comforting." "It is not meant to be comforting. It is meant to be true." She grabbed his arm and pulled him away from the council to a quiet corner of the chamber. "Tell me what you are planning. Tell me the truth." Silas looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the weight of decision in his eyes. The Vreth Syndicate is powerful, but they are also cowards. They only attack when they are certain of victory. And right now they are certain because they believe they face only the Kelori fleet. What will change their minds? Fear. The same fear that has kept humanity's enemies at bay for generations. The fear of what happens when you push humans too far, and you can make them afraid. I was trained for exactly this. There are things I can do that I have spent years trying to forget, but I still remember. I will always remember. Valeth felt her throat tighten. "Will you come back?" "Yes. Promise me." Silas reached out and touched her face, his calloused fingers gentle against her silver skin. "I promise you. I did not survive everything I have survived just to die now. I have finally found something worth living for." She kissed him then, the first time their lips had ever touched. And it was desperate and fierce and full of all the words she did not know how to say. "Come back to." She whispered against his mouth. "Always." He left Valeth, returned to the observation deck, and watched his shuttle depart. From the palace hangar, a tiny speck of light moving toward the massive wall of Vreth warships. Communications officer reported that the shuttle was broadcasting a message to the Vreth flagship on an open channel. "This is Silas Varn, formerly designated Whisper 7, requesting a direct meeting with the fleet commander. I suggest you accept." There was silence from the Vreth fleet. Then a response: "Surrender your vessel and prepare to be boarded." "Human, I am not surrendering anything. I am offering you a chance to survive. You have 30 seconds to grant my request. You dare threaten us?" "I do not threaten. I inform." 20 seconds. The entire Kelori command center held its breath as the seconds ticked by at 15 seconds. The Vreth flagship's weapons powered up at 10 seconds. 3 Vreth destroyers began moving to intercept the shuttle at 5 seconds. Something happened at Valith. Did not know what she was seeing at first. The tactical display showed the shuttle approaching the Vreth formation, and then there was a burst of static and 3 of the destroyers lost power simultaneously. "What happened?" Admiral Karth demanded. "Unknown. The destroyers are reporting complete system failure, all 3 at once. Their crews are alive, but the ships are dead." Silas's shuttle continued forward, approaching the flagship, more static. More failures. 2 cruisers went dark, then 4 more. Then the flagship itself began experiencing cascading system breakdowns. The communications channel crackled. "This is the voice of humanity's shadow," Silas said. And his voice was different now, cold and hard and terrible. "I have placed viral packages in 12 of your vessels. If I do not send a countersignal every 30 seconds, they will spread to your entire fleet and leave you helpless in enemy space. You are bluffing. You have already lost 3 destroyers and 2 cruisers. Would you like to lose more? Silence. What do you want? I want you to leave this system and never return. I want you to issue a formal apology to the Kalori Empire. I want you to understand that this world and these people are under my protection. And I want you to tell everyone you meet that the price of attacking Keller Prime is higher than anyone can afford to pay. The Syndicate does not bow to threats. Then the Syndicate will die here today. I have disabled your escape drives. Your weapons are offline. Your shields are failing. You have nothing left but your lives, and I am offering to let you keep them. The Vreth fleet hung in space. 87 warships reduced to drifting hulks by a single man in a single shuttle. If we agree to your terms, how do we know you will let us leave? You do not know. You will simply have to trust that I want peace more than I want your deaths. And I do. I am very tired of killing. Please do not make me do more of it. There was a long pause. We agreed to your terms. The Vreth fleet limped away 6 hours later. Their systems slowly coming back online as Silas released his viral hold on their vessel's Velith, was waiting in the hangar when his shuttle returned. And she ran to him the moment the door opened. He caught her in his arms and held her tightly. And she felt him trembling, felt the cost of what he had done. It is over? She asked. It is over. They will not return. The Syndicate will spread word of what happened here, and no one will dare attack Keller Prime again. What did you do to their ships? Something I learned a long time ago. Something I hoped I would never have to use again. She pulled back to look at his face and saw the exhaustion there. The weight of old memories. You terrified them. Did you not? You became the weapon again. For a moment. Yes, but only for a moment, and only to protect what matters. They walked together out of the hangar and into the palace gardens. And Silas knelt beside his plants, touching the green leaves with infinite tenderness. You could have ruled empires, Valus said quietly. With what you can do, you could have had anything. I have killed enough for 10 empires. I have seen enough death to fill 1,000 lifetimes. All I want now is to grow something, to build something, to prove that these hands can create as well as destroy. Valith knelt beside him and took his hands in hers. Then we will grow something together. He looked at her with those pale eyes that had seen too much. And for the first time since she had known him, he smiled. It was a small smile, quiet and uncertain, like a plant emerging from dark soil towards sunlight. But it was real. I would like that, he said softly. I would like that very much. They stayed in the garden as the twin suns rose, planting new seeds in fresh earth. And Valith thought about the strange path that had brought her here. She had been given a husband she did not want, a human she thought was weak and broken. A puzzle she could not solve. She had found a warrior. Yes, a weapon forged in darkness and blood. But she had also found a gardener. A man who chose peace when he could have chosen power. Who chose to build when he could have destroyed. Who chose love when he could have remained alone. The galaxy was full of monsters. She knew that now better than ever, but it was also full of quiet heroes, men and women who carried their